Alright, this video is going to be about, well, another Hex-n-Chit game that I think really should be converted to miniatures on the subject matter that I love the most. This is Air Superiority from Games Design Workshop, a Hex-n-Chit game from the fading twilight of the Hex-n-Chit era. It was produced in 1987, and I had a conversation about it with this friend of mine. Too bad that I couldn't use it in the video because the audio was damaged, but still. Air Superiority is what happens when a real fighter jet pilot gets a hold of a copy of Air War, the other game that I've previously put in my videos, and decides, you know what, I'm going to make my own version of this. And actually, it wasn't badly thought out. Air Superiority is just about the air-to-air combat. In the same exact year, they released Air Strike, which actually includes more than just, your standard ground pounders. This literally has other aircraft that can dogfight as well. I'll get to that and explain that in a bit. And that was followed up a year later with the last of the series, Desert Falcons, which, if you ask me, this is a great idea, releasing a little booklet you can drop into the other boxes you have for your game. It includes a lot of obsolete aircraft that were used in the Middle East wars. And so it rounds out your selection of, I have crappy aircraft, I have aircraft that usually do air-to-ground missions, but for this time around, some of them can dogfight, and the cream of the crop. As you can see, Air War, the previous game made by TSR, that game was one box. Air Superiority, Air Strike, and Desert Falcons is a three-part series, of course. However, not necessarily a bad thing, because when this was released, they were already obviously planning to release Air Strike, and Desert Falcons just followed up on everything else to make a more complete game. There are aircraft missing in Air Superiority and its following series from Air War, but it has more aircraft in general. There's also a lot this game does that makes it, quite honestly, a superior game. First of all, it does retain, put things aside here, it does retain the original aesthetics of just, print on paper. It maintains the 12-point turn system, with the corner of the chit facing either the hex facing or a corner. This game also has the interesting thing where you can take your aircraft and legally put it on the hex line as long as it's facing a hex, as opposed to just having it in the hex only. So you can actually put on hex lines. If you're crossing a line of hexes where usually you'd be dogging back and forth, you can just stop on that point there, and it's legal. So this game actually has a lot more fluidity to how it uses hexes than the previous Air War. I could turn through this and show a lot of different things, but the turn charts in this game are single step. In Air War, you have the turn chart on your aircraft, which you must compare against the turn chart in the book, and then calculate between the two of them what your actual turn is going to be like based on your banking and whatnot. This game, not only does it get rid of that complexity in the turn charts, it also, and here are the turn charts right here, it's actually, look, it's a single reference thing based on your altitude versus your, your speed and turn rates. This also gets rid of banking. You had that 4-page section of Air War dedicated to how you bank with your jet fighters. Not in Air Superiority. It's just assumed, hey, we know modern jet fighters can pretty much just bank on demand. Unless you have to flip your aircraft completely around, there's no reason to go into banking. I think they have it so you spend a flight point, and congratulations. Well, you're now angled in the other direction. So congratulations as far as that's concerned. There's a lot of stuff that gets taken out away from Air War and simplified in this game. Turn points, like your turn rate isn't based on a point accumulation system at all. It's like, how fast are you going? How high are you? This is your general turn rate. Go to town. The rule book, here's a scenario booklet. Going back to the rule book does have sections in it where it will actually tell you as you're going through. It says, you can now play this scenario. And so as you're reading through the rulebook for the first time, you can stop and play basic scenarios based off the rules you've learned. That's very accessible. If you're threatened by all this text and diagrams and charts, congratulations, you have the ability to just read through, and when you get to a section where you've grasped X concept, you can play that concept. One thing I also got to point out, in Air War's main rulebook, as an optional thing, they have electronic warfare. Here on page 16, it has chaff and flares, ECM pods, aircraft identification friend and foe. It's got what you need to play basic rules for modern jet fighters in one book. Everything else supports this. The turn charts here, this contains charts for like missiles, and that's another thing. This is your missile data. You don't have a flight sheet for each individual missile. That's it. So if in the previous game you were worried about missiles taking up slots on your control sheet, which they did. In Air War, you had to have a separate piloting sheet up and ready for your missiles when you launched your missiles. Here, they're a weapons class, so they don't take up their own priority planning sheet. You just shoot them like they're a weapon. That's great. And one thing I also like, the scenario booklet, it's very simple. Most of it is dedicated to scenarios. I mean, it's got a few things saying, here's the aircraft that are available, or here's the victory points for killing such an aircraft. But for the most part, it's just got butt tons of scenarios. More than they had in Air War. However, that's not too much of a distractor. Air War actually had some fun, interesting scenarios. This one is focused on getting aircraft out and fighting. And they have a fluff book. That's what this is. The briefing booklet, you don't need this to play the game. This is a good thing to read first, though, because it pretty much tells you, here's what all the aircraft are, and here's how they get used. And then it has an entire section about, here's what the Air Forces have at various time and point. It also has, this actually has the loadouts that are typical for the aircraft you have. Oh yeah, I missed the Air Force page. It was this one. This is the Air Force page. This is loadouts. And then the last 3 pages are tactical advice for noobs, tactics and strategies down here. This page has a lot of very good information on it that doesn't just apply to Air Superiority, the Hex-n-Chit game. This is just good strategic information right here, and I'm glad I own this little booklet. The designer notes literally say the one thing that my one friend noticed is like, who played Air War and decided to just make a different game that was better than that? J.D. Webster did. He's a former A7 Corsair pilot that decided he wanted to get into the idea of making games. And of course, you've got your turn charts. They're double-sided on this version of the game. I am going to scan these and print it out like a character sheet because that's good. I like that kind of aspect. Flipping things over. The card gaming has happened in wargaming presently for various different reasons, but honestly speaking, character sheets have always been easier, and the logic of gamers nowadays is more based on consuming product than it is understanding ease of flow. A card isn't as convenient as you think unless it's a very informative card that has everything on one side, so you don't have to stop and flip anything over. So I'm going to have these sheets one-sided, so I'll have to scan and arrange them in Photoshop. It's got Hex-n-Chit, as you'd expect. This is, of course, someone else's previous copy. My thought is to use this with miniatures. I love miniatures. I love air combat miniatures, and I'm thinking this will fit in just fine. One thing I also like about it is the game is pretty much future compatible. They included weird stuff like the F-19 stealth fighter. The F-19 stealth fighter is a hypothetical fighter that was talked about during the 80s. But it's also the cover aircraft for the F-22. So you can play the F-22 using F-19 stealth fighter rules if you really want to. So congratulations, it's a bit future-proofed there. They do have the Super Tomcat in this version of the book. They have the Su-27 Flanker. They have the MiG-31 Foxhound, not the MiG-25, so they actually have upgraded the Foxhound. The obsolete version is over in Desert Falcons. What do you know? Because the Libyans used those. So this box set when he made this box set, he took into account the most modern, up-to-date aircraft he could. And it shows, if you look at Airstrike. Airstrike is the ground-pounding version of this game, but it's also the one that has, if you look at just the offerings on the back, it includes weird things such as the Rafale, the IDS Tornado. Here's another thing I was talking about dogfighting with these aircraft. Yes, you can. It has the Aviate Harrier. The British used that as their primary dogfighter during the Falklands conflict. So this airstrike book allows you to actually play with aircraft that were used in dogfights in the Falklands. The A4 and the Harrier are both in here. It also has the F-111, which, of course, the F-111 is pretty much a reconnaissance plane in this day and age, but it was originally designed as a fighter. So if you want to play air fighting scenarios where you have an F-111 doing top cover while other F-111s do their ground pounding mission, you can do that. Now here it has charts that allow you to do computations to attack ground targets and how those generally work. This is how the, yeah, I haven't cut this one out yet because this is a fresh box that I bought. They're perforated in the center, so you can actually just cut out and then remove off the edge the different fighter cards. And it's got all kinds of fun stuff in here. The Corsair being the aircraft that the author flew. F-15E Strike Eagle, talk about future-proofing. They're making right now a thing called F-15X. The F-15 is going to be used for the next 30 years. It's that good of an aircraft. They decided to just remake the F-15 into a much more modernized version that's been announced recently. It's happening. There's no way around it. And you can play that kind of aircraft with probably just a little bit of modification with the technology listing. It's got a great technology listing. Look at that. Well, there you go. And funny enough, it includes not just one A-10 Thunderbolt, it includes the double-seater version as well. Which is funny because isn't that the double-seater version art, and that's the art for the original? Huh, okay. That can be handled in Photoshop too. Okay. So I'll take care of that. But yeah, it's a fun... Oh, it's got the F-16 Super Scamp. Awesome. Talk about... That's a what-if aircraft. But it's great they include that. That's so nice. The Rafale was used in combat in 2011 in Libya. So if you want to play... Think about it. This is a game from 1987 you can fight 2011 battles with. Talk to me about that. Of course, it's also got old fun stuff like the Buccaneer, the Jaguar. Jaguar could probably also go for the Japanese F1 too. Yeah, the IDS Tornado versus the MRCA. Yeah. Then we have... Look at all these light trainer aircraft that includes as well. So the bottom half of this, the AMX aircraft, nice. So... Oh, and it includes the Joss Gripen, my favorite modern fighter. This can actually be used as a drone nowadays, too, without a pilot. It gets remote flown. So the Joss Gripen is... It's in this aircraft, and it's being used in air forces nowadays from a 1987 game. I love that. That's just great. The technology listing is pretty nice, too. Weird. Here it has an advertisement. This is an old school advertisement for a military technology magazine, and it has an actual errata. It has actual ground printed charts and a feedback card. This one has not been punched, and it's got all these aircraft. Yeah. What can I say? It's a fun little... That's the actual ground targets you can shoot at, and the anti-aircraft installations that will be shooting back at you when you go down that low. So the last thing after airstrike, Desert Falcons. It's pretty much a one-stop shop upgrade that has, like I said, obsolete stuff like Hawker Hunters, the Vampire, the Meteor. The Cluster Meteor, that was designed in World War II. So we've got things as far forward in the future as like the Rafale and the Gripen, and as far back in time as World War II. The only thing that makes this game incomplete for me is not including stats for an ME-262. Because God knows, everybody who's ever picked up a jet fighter aircraft game wants to fight an ME-262 garbage airplane versus somebody else and see how that turns out. It's no guaranteed win there, but just the idea of doing it is just hilariously fun. And, of course, there's no punch-out chits. You just photocopy and paste, I guess, for these guys. Includes a Piper Cub for those brave Israelis who use Piper Cubs as spotting and bombing aircraft. But, yeah, this is Desert Falcons being last in the series. Airstrike. Air Superiority. I have all three. I'm glad I have all three. And they're going to get used in a miniature game here in the near future. I'm talking about just the game itself. There's a bunch of things in here that actually, looking through the various different rules, I just like. It's not a college dissertation where you have to go through and have the erudite details of how to fly an aircraft in counter explained to you. The counters are there to represent how fluid air combat can go. And there's a lot of myths that this pilot who wrote this game debunks in this game. I like that. He talks about how missiles didn't end warfare. Missiles aren't a perfect kill-all weapon. There's always a chance of failure. There are ways to counter missiles. Chaff and ECM are very effective. That kind of stuff. I'm also glad that when he included his spotting rules, there's a lot of visual emphasis placed on not only this cloud layer and how the sun affects cloud layer and how the cloud layer works up and down, below it and above it. It also talks about paint scheme. Camouflage actually works in this game, which is weird because I saw a video. There's a video out there where there's an F-15 in American Air Superiority Gray 1990s, not the 80s version, and there's like an Su-27 flanker in Russian colors. And they're both in tandem. One must have intercepted the other. And they turn and then fly away from the camera towards a cloud bank. And you see in the video, the Russian flanker disappears first. Russian flankers have a very bright blue on the bottom of their aircraft. That's a really good color for having your aircraft disappear in some cloud layers. So that's included in this game. You have your bonuses and minuses to spotting based on not just where you are and not just the clouds, but also how your aircraft's painted, including if it's solid silver. Solid silver was a thing for Soviet and Third World aircraft for a while. I also like the fact that you don't have to use the air combat log, but it fits on one sheet of paper. I believe it actually fits 2 aircraft on one sheet of paper. Don't need to spread out a giant control panel to play an aircraft. You could probably play multiple aircraft on the equivalent of a 11 by 17 sheet. I like that. I like that a lot. So I'm going to be playing a game of Air Superiority here in the near future. I want to. In fact, this may be a game I play multiple times because they fix so many problems that Hex-n-Chit games and old school games have when it comes to making things excessively complex and forgetting that, yes, there's mathematical complexity in our lives when you explain certain things, but when you're there in the cockpit, things happen quickly. And this game is all about things happening quickly. It's not hard to find. I do recommend if you're into air combat games, go out and buy the whole trifecta. Buy Air Superiority, buy Airstrike. If you can find Desert Falcons, buy this. I do think they're available. They may be on collector's prices. I haven't checked recently. I bought these a while ago. This game has my mark of approval. I have not played it yet, but I've read enough about it, and reading of the rules, how it translates to tabletop, this is headed in the right direction. So I have high hopes for this game being a future platform or for even any kind of air combat. Designed for Hex-n-Chit, very plausible to play it in miniature, and I'm going to be having hex mats that will fit these aircraft and get them good and going. By the way, let me show you this. Nowadays, everything's supposed to be simple and easy to play. Back then, they would tell you, yeah, this is an intermediate game. You can play this game, but it's not going to be a super easy game to play. I can guarantee you most games nowadays are based on an introductory level rule set where they're leaving the tactics up to you and making the rules as simple as possible. This streamlines the rules, but everything you need to play a realistic game of air combat is in here. So, thank you for watching the video. I hope you have a good rest of your whatever time period you're judging things by. I look forward to making some videos about air combat with this rule set.